Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of Soft Edges. I am Maestro Cal, and here with my dear friend Lucy Gerard, we will begin discussing Pleasure Activism, the Politics of Feeling Good by Adrienne Maree Brown, specifically the section until the page 53. Hi Lucy, how are you doing?
Hey Maes, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm quite excited, quite happy to do this with you and to, carry our daily conversations onto a platform like this.
Oh yes, I'm so excited.
Yeah, I feel like many of these things we will talk about in this podcast won't be much different than the content of our regular conversations.
Yeah, that
during
wouldn't be
our
a
now
surprise.
5-year-old friendship, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think it'll be a great way also to learn even more about each other, if that's possible.
Absolutely. Only perhaps maybe the language will be much less vulgar.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because Lucy and I, we have a tendency to roast each other constantly, so that might jump out on here as well. It will jump out. I'm already bracing for it.
I will do my best to tone it down, to give a good impression to our listeners.
Well, Lucy, I want to start by introducing Adrienne Maree Brown a bit.
Yes, of course.
And by her own words in Pleasure Activism, she is a facilitator, emergent strategist, doula, healer, auntie extraordinaire, and pleasure activist.
Mm-hmm.
But in her most recent book, We Will Not Cancel Us, there's another self-introduction by Brown, which I really enjoyed.
Oh.
There she says, I am a black, biracial, queer, fat survivor, witch, movement facilitator, and mediator.
Wow. That's really powerful.
Absolutely.
I love it.
The reason I wanted to start this series with Brown's work is that I deeply feel that she is one of the most unique, effective, important, and brilliantly observant voices of our time, especially within the movements working towards liberation and abolition.
I completely agree with you. And I mean, I know her because of you. You introduced her to me, and that's just such a wonderful addition to my life, to be quite honest.
I'm so happy
We'll
to
get
hear
into that as we go on with the episodes, of course, as we get deeper and deeper into her works. But yeah, I think she is a pioneer in a lot of ways, and her voice is so important, and she is so well spoken, but at the same time, raw, very raw.
Yeah, absolutely. I really see her as a great mentor for social justice movements and for transformative justice and the formation of that justice practice. And the ways in which all of that relates to the body, to the connective tissue of society.
Oh yeah, for sure, absolutely. And it's something that we don't really get to talk about, do we? We're still weirdly disconnected from our bodies as a society and our pleasure, which is exactly what she talks about in this book.
Absolutely. And I love how she carries this legacy of incredible black writers, activists, and abolitionists, mostly citing the work of Octavia Butler as one of the main sources of her own work. I mean, seriously, I have devoured her work since I discovered her in 2019, and I am an enthusiastic follower of whatever she puts out. She's just amazing. I love her.
Yeah, she's wonderful. Yeah. She's a queen.
And pleasure activism is a journey to and for pleasure and for erotic awakening. The book consists of essays Brown wrote and collected, interviews she conducted, and some poems. She describes pleasure as a measure of freedom, an indicator of wholeness, aliveness, and joy within our bodies. Isn't that such a great description?
Yes. Holy shit, yes.
I love it.
I love it
this,
too.
Saying this pleasure is a feeling of happy satisfaction and enjoyment, and putting it in a frame of being like a guiding force towards liberation and reclaiming our whole happy selves from these harming systems of oppression and supremacy that surround us constantly. I think what's brilliant about this work is also the care she gave to establishing her introduction in the beginning, in a way that exposes how our identities are interconnected to so many political and social constructs, right? Like race, supremacy, and gender, the way she puts her identity within these frames. And she opens the entire book by setting the frame through which she identifies herself, being really explicitly trans-inclusive, body positive, fat positive, sex positive, disability inclusive, and pointing to the future in which many genders outside the binary can be happy, live and love safely. It's just such a conscious language that she uses to introduce herself, such a caring and loving language.
Exactly.
While welcoming the reader to this safe space she creates.
Oh yeah, I love her introduction for all of these reasons. I think she truly, the word caring really resonates with me because that's exactly how I felt when I read the introduction. I was like, wow, I'm taken care of as I'm reading this book. I felt like I was given a big hug as I was reading the introduction. And I love how she really shared her values first and who she is first, and a little bit of her background, her history, and who she truly is. And that just makes you feel much more comfortable as a reader because you feel included, you feel accepted, you feel loved as you read her words. And I find that really wonderful. You don't find that in a lot of books and works, written works nowadays, I feel.
Definitely. I mean, also she states her constant growth as well, and the new discoveries as a reminder that she won't exactly be the same person she once was writing these pages in the future.
Oh yeah, and she doesn't pretend to be perfect as well. She states that very clearly, that she's still learning and growing and evolving, ever changing, and she's not like this perfect well of knowledge that doesn't make mistakes or never made mistakes before. And that's also such an important point, I feel.
I love that. It even reflects on the glossary that she shares in the book, because she states that this glossary could potentially will change in the future, since
Yes,
the way it takes root from Octavia Butler's work is that the change is the only lasting truth, the only constant. So she's really aware of that also.
Mm-hmm.
And just like you said, it's not often that you come across a writer who handles the reader so early on like this.
Yeah.
I often dive in so openly to new texts I read, and sometimes I feel ways in which they, intentionally or not, harm me a little bit. I feel it when I need to recover after reading it, right?
Oh, wow, yeah.
But none of Adrienne Maree Brown's work ever made me feel like that so far.
Yeah, that's not surprising to me because she does have, her aura, only through her words, like words on paper, you can feel that she's absolutely not here to harm you, but most likely, and she's more likely to guide you and nurture you. Something that really caught my attention in her introduction was also the fact that she mentions the power of enough. So she talks about the power of pleasure, right? And how pleasure activism is such a powerful thing, and that it empowers us when we are fully embodied in it. But she also mentions how knowing when you have enough of something is just as powerful and just as empowering. I don't know if that resonated with you as well.
Yeah, it definitely did.
Yeah.
The way she frames excess is very interesting also.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I really love also that it's 2 paragraphs basically. And I'm going to quote her here because my own brain is not going to be able to say such beautiful things. But she says, "So rather than encouraging moderation over and over, I want to ask you to relinquish your own longing for excess and to stay mindful of your relationship to enough." End quote.
Absolutely.
Isn't that so fucking powerful?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. That's like one of the parts I underlined also.
And I really appreciate how Brown approaches to drug use, that taboo subject, that act that is vilified and criminalized to terrible extents, like with the war on drugs destroying all these communities and lives of black and brown bodies and people of color, and the way she relates that use to pleasure, not only as a means to an end, like pain relief, but also purely for joy. And her attitude really welcomes drug use
for pleasure.
Yes.
And I really like that. I really enjoyed that.
It's very unique. It's a very unique approach because, of course, as she says, and as we all know, drugs are most often vilified. And you just hear about the worst possible situations with drugs. And the way that she approaches it is so open and so real as well, because drugs, yes, they can make you feel really good. They can bring you a lot of pleasure, and they can also open your mind in ways that you didn't expect. I'm thinking about truffles or mushrooms, psychedelics of all sorts. You can have such spiritual and vulnerable and honest visions and experiences with those drugs. And that's something that we shouldn't forget. Drugs are not just overdoses and pain and darkness and rock bottoms, not at all.
In the nature also, we know certain animals really enjoying certain psychedelic plants, right?
Yeah, that's true. It's fucking nature, man.
Absolutely. There was also one thing very interesting to me when Brown listed these examples of what makes us feel good, and she went with this list like sex and the erotic, drugs, humor, passion work, connection, reading, cooking and or eating, music and other arts, she also included fashion, which is true for me personally also, because fashion makes me feel good. Wearing beautiful clothes and adorning myself with beautiful colors and patterns and accessories is an act of self-love for me.
Yeah, same. I completely agree. And it's funny that you mentioned it, because when I read the word fashion in that list, it surprised me, because I had never considered it as like a source of pleasure, you know what I mean? And I was like, fuck yeah, it is a source of pleasure. I love watching, that sounds creepy, but looking at people who dress really well, or choosing clothes for myself. And yeah, it really is a source of pleasure to just feel good. I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, girl, you look fine. Those clothes look good on you. You make those clothes look good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, because I was also a bit too aware of the fashion industry and the harm that also inflicts on the planet. But Brown's work really rerouted this in this new context for me of this book, which exposes how pleasure has been hoarded by a certain social class, right? Because I just found myself pondering on how fashion has also historically been exclusive to the ruling class. How in the history museums, most of those stolen artifacts, of course, they display are jewelries of kings and queens and wealthy military officers or merchants and such. And it still is actually like good fabric, quality material, and designs are exclusively at reach of those who can afford it. And or how mass media is shocked when Jane Fonda wears the same thing 5 times, right?
Yeah, that's just unbelievable to me.
Yeah. And perhaps that gives thrifting a subtle quality of resistance, right? I mean, but I mean like real flea market thrifting, not like those stores selling the vintage clothes for astronomical prices.
No, not the chains and shit.
Yeah.
No, but I agree with you. And actually, recently in the past, about a year and a half ago, I completely stopped consuming fast fashion. Just because after doing my own research about their practices, it just didn't align with what I believed in. And I started thrifting and going to flea markets and small vintage shops and thrift stores, and it gives me so much more pleasure to really go on the hunt for a piece of clothing, and then I feel so satisfied and so happy when I find something. Even if during a whole day of thrifting I find one thing that's really unique and really beautiful, it makes me so happy. So it's again like redefining what fashion means to us and how we can get pleasure from it.
Definitely finding that beautiful blue woolen coat suddenly, right? And then just grabbing it for...
Exactly. Although I'd like to say that I don't like judge people who buy fast fashion and who consume fast fashion, because I'm totally aware that it's a very cheap, affordable option for people to grab clothes when they want a new piece of clothing, or even 10, or for Christmas, for gifts and such. So that's totally not a judgment from me.
On my side as well. I mean... capitalism around us creates almost a no-exit situation. It makes it very difficult to deal with some of these things.
Exactly.
But do whatever makes you feel good. This is the point, right?
Yes.
Maybe we can move on to section 1.
Oh, yeah.
Which begins with the question, who taught you to feel good?
Yes.
Where Brown introduces us to her lineage of pleasure activists. Her grandmother, Octavia Butler, of course, Audre Lorde, Toni Cade Bambara, Frida Kahlo, her aunt Margaret, and many others. I love that. And I wanted to ask you, Lucy, to answer the question Brown posed at the end of this section. Yes. Who would you consider a part of your pleasure activism lineage? Like, who awakened your senses? Who politicized your experience of body, identity, sensation, and feeling good? Yeah,
that's such a good question. I thought about it a lot, because at first I was like, who are my inspirations? Who are my guides for pleasure, for all of that? And it was difficult for me to find really. It just made me think. I realized I wasn't really exposed to that kind of empowerment growing up, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And most of the time I would just discover pleasure on my own, whether it would be sexual pleasure or any sort of pleasure, really. Mm-hmm. But of course now I can honestly say that Adrienne Maree Brown is one of these people, my inspirations and my great, how would you say, pioneers in my life for pleasure. But also 5-6 years ago, I met this girl who I really connected with Not because we had long conversations or we immediately hit it off, but it was the way that she carried herself in the room and the way that she talked about her own body and her own love for herself. I couldn't quote what she said back then, but I remember thinking, holy shit, you can be like that. You can be
Beautiful.
like, you can just walk around knowing and believing that you're beautiful, that your body is worthy, and take pleasure in just being, and just carrying yourself into a room and talking to people and opening up and helping them open up. And that was, I think, another person that I can list on that list.
Wow, such a good encounter from that
Yeah,
little
it was very random.
window opening that you saw with her.
It was just
It
one
triggered
moment.
a beautiful change, yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
I mean, for me, just like, for example, the kinship Brown expresses in the book that she felt with her grandmother, whom she describes as someone who's sexually liberated, right? I, as a child, would also feel a certain kinship whenever I would come in contact with a woman who would appear to have an unconventional lifestyle in a way for the traditional Turkish society. Be it a friend of my mother or a teacher or a stranger in a public space. And I distinctly remember, and I'm still able to recall the feeling of like this relief and this fresh, bright energy the presence of such people would bring to me.
Yeah.
Witnessing them and perceiving their life decisions and the way they hold themselves, just like you said. I also can't really quote anything, or my observations were probably, a lot of them was my own projections, but still I recognize that energy and that feeling.
The aura.
Yeah, exactly. But also mainly queer and trans people have been a big inspiration for me throughout my life in unapologetically claiming a pleasurable connection with our bodies. And but I think I must also say my sister Jeren, who is a natural pleasure activist, definitely she has been an inspiration for me, because in how convinced she is in the necessity of feeling good in whatever situation she finds herself in. I love that. That's how she has always been.
That's so amazing. That's so wonderful. And
Yeah.
I know your sister. I have met her only a couple of times, but I can agree with you from the few encounters I've had with her. She really embodies that.
She embodies that naturally. She doesn't even need the theory for it. I love that so much.
She exalts pleasure. It's kind of crazy.
Absolutely. She's that kind of, wonderful goddess, you know. Shall we move on to the essay, Uses of Erotic, The Erotic as Power by Audre Lorde?
Abso-fucking-lutely.
It's included in the book in its entirety, which was, I think, a great decision, seriously.
I completely agree. It's a life-changing essay, I think.
August 25th, 1978, the essay first published, Uses of the Erotic as Power. This essay is where Brown points as one of the main roots of pleasure activism, and Brown then herself broadens the scope of the traditional definition of erotic as only relating to sexual arousal or desire to include all of the experiences that bring us a feeling of aliveness and joy. Yeah, in other words, it's a full-bodied yes, right? This yes feeling.
Exactly. An orgasmic yes.
Absolutely. Like, the lack of pleasure and joy just doesn't match with liberation and satisfaction. That's like the core point in this essay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so true. And I don't know how we haven't been taught that before.
Yeah. That's seriously.
It's like a very basic value of life.
Yeah, but it's such a thing that once you understand it, it's mind-blowing and it's life-changing forever. It changes your entire approach to everything and every situation you find yourself in.
Yeah. It's so...
That's why it's such a power.
Exactly, a fucking power. Like a superpower.
I got acquainted with Audre Lorde's work in 2014 when I read I Am Your Sister, a collection of non-fiction prose from Lorde, and I was very impressed. And she very often describes herself as a black lesbian feminist, and this unapologetic claim on her identity was also really influential to me from the first moment I got to know about her.
Yeah.
And after so many years of trying to catch a screening of this documentary called Audre Lorde, The Berlin Years, in 1984 to 1992, I recently found it available to rent on Vimeo and watched it, Lucy. It was incredible.
Yes.
Seeing Audre Lorde, like her passion and her leadership and her humanness and her dynamics with her friends, fellow activists and artists, and with her partner, Gloria Joseph. I mean, it was so beautiful. I can recommend everyone to watch it. Please just watch it. And I was in tears at the end. It touched me so deeply, seriously.
I'm so curious. I really want to watch it. I think I'm going to rent it on Vimeo as well, as you recommended.
Perfect. Well, with this text, what I feel is that the foundation of pleasure activism is in the assertion that we all need and deserve pleasure. And this need and right is the reason why we need to reorganize all of the social, political, and economic systems in a way that reflects them.
Absolutely.
As Brown states also.
Yes, absolutely. That's the core of it.
And what I caught here is that I see an overlapping with the work of Tricia Hersey. Maybe you've heard of her and her work, the Nap Bishop of the Nap Ministry, whose work promotes rest as reparations and seeks to, awaken in us the truth of the grind culture and how it keeps us docile with the illusion of scarcity and making us work our lives off to generate wealth for the privileged others, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the point this connects to Audre Lorde's essay is that being well informed about the pleasure capacity of our bodies makes it impossible for us to comply with these exploitative structures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really takes away the veil that we've been forced to live behind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the fact that we get empowered by pleasure, that we realize that we are fucking worthy and fucking legitimate to pleasure, to our own fucking pleasure.
Exactly.
It really takes away this veil and this belief system that we've been in, that's been fed to us by the makers, let's say, of our current Western society.
Yeah.
And it's true when I thought about it, and that's something that really made me think, society doesn't really ever encourage pleasure and excellence of living, an excellent way of life, apart from when it's result related, when it's like excellence in the sense of making a shit ton of money, or being the best at something, or beating everybody in a certain field. When it comes to that, they're like, yes, if you're not the best, you're just a piece of shit.
Yes.
But when it comes to being excellent in our lives, in our true self, in our pleasure, in our values, in our alignment with what we believe in, nobody's here. Nobody's talking about that.
Exactly. Because it's such a big power. This awareness we get of deserving better rapidly takes over, right? And it makes us more convinced in our resistance and demands. There's a quote within a quote from Brown and Lorde, and it says, "Erotic makes us give up of necessity being satisfied with suffering and self-negation.
Yes.
Even settling for the spaces or conditions consciously marked as safe by capitalism become not enough for being merely safe. We just refuse to stay powerless, and the root of what we need and deserve becomes clearer to us. And we feel less and less afraid to stretch towards it. There's so much power in that. And I just feel like all of change depends on this. It needs to feel good.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I think that's why it's not as widely spread, this concept.
Yeah.
Because it is scary for the ones who would not benefit from us being empowered by our pleasure in every sense of the way. It scares the shit out of them.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It really scares the shit out of them. I believe that 100%.
When we demand our pleasure, we will eventually demand for big systemic change, right? And that will really stop this illusion of false scarcity, and it will allow everyone the rest and pleasure that are our elemental rights. In the text also, Lorde begins by stating how these oppressive structures corrupt or distort the sources of power within the culture of the oppressed that can provide energy and that will challenge the status quo.
Oh, yeah.
And erotic is one of those sources of power.
Oh, yeah.
It's a massive power.
A massive power, indeed.
She also makes the distinction between erotic and pornographic, and which I found really interesting as well.
Yeah, me too. I wanted to talk to you about that. I was curious on what your stance was on that part of her essay.
I found it very interesting that she defined pornographic as the opposite of erotic. And in a way that she also emphasizes sensation without feeling in pornography, right?
Yeah.
And this emphasis on the importance of feeling throughout this text is something I hold very dear to myself. It really spoke to me, spoke to my heart. Because, having lived predominantly in very capitalistic cultures and structures where feelings are seen as an unproductive byproduct of the human condition, I just felt this oppression on feeling and feelings very often on both systemic levels, but also in interpersonal relationships. The feeling is disregarded as something useless or like a block on the path to productivity or something.
Yeah.
This reminded me of a certain moment. For example, when we were intensely dealing with institutionalized racism during our last months before graduation at the Gerrit Rietveld Academy, remember?
Oh, yes, I do.
And we were trying to formulate how we could utilize that moment towards a real systemic change and such. I also went through it with many emotions, like complicated emotions. And a couple of times when I tried to reroute the conversation on a feeling-based discussion, by expressing or openly displaying my sadness or anger or asking others how they felt about these events, I feel like it wasn't very welcome even in our small circle, or maybe more like wasn't seen as very integral or important.
I completely understand that. And I have to admit, I saw that kind of reaction within our group when it came to your expression of feelings, which was a little bit surprising to me because they all seemed so uncomfortable with the fact that you were openly being angry or being sad or touched, upset, whatever the feelings you were feeling at that time were. It was just weird to me that they were reacting this way, and it proves again that we are taught to see feelings as things that are maybe making you weaker. Is that something that, does that make sense? Like, would it be the reason why feelings are so taboo? Because if you feel something and you express it on top of that, it makes you weak.
Perhaps it's like that, or it can also be perceived as unproductive. Like, okay, we get it, you're angry, we are all angry, okay? So shall we move on what we do about it? You know what I mean? But I think like staying connected to how these situations make us feel is crucial to our movement.
Fuck yeah.
Otherwise, we just imitate a white supremacist ideal of exclusively frontal functioning of our mind, being very rational while disregarding emotion as something that needs to be restrained or something. And seriously, that doesn't work with me.
No.
I want spaces that accommodate how we feel, where we feel safe enough to express how we feel and able to ask each other how we feel and just say like, yeah, this makes me really sad. Like suddenly this teacher that I loved for 4 years turns out to be a racist, and that makes me really angry and sad, And I wish we could accommodate each other on that front more. I mean, of course, you and I did in our interpersonal communication tremendously. We always accommodate each other's emotions. But I think in a movement space, that's really useful. And that's why this emphasis Lorde makes on feeling really speaks to me.
Yeah.
I feel like we shouldn't allow the robbery of erotic value in situations. And emotions and feelings facilitate the entire erotic value of a situation.
Exactly. And I do believe that expressing your feelings, your emotions at the moment where you feel them can be a source of pleasure. You know what I mean? When you have something heavy on your heart and you really need to say it to the person in front of you, even if this person is not the cause of your emotion, saying it in that moment, it brings you a sense of relief. It brings you a sense of togetherness, having someone listening to you, being open and caring and holding you. That is such an important thing, and it can be so pleasurable.
Absolutely. We can hear each other. We can take a deep breath together and say like, yes, this hurts, right? Yeah, this hurts.
Exactly.
I think that's a wonderful starting point.
Yeah. And
connected to this, another point I had with the essay was how it states that it became fashionable to separate the spiritual from the political, to see them as contradictory or antithetical, says Lorde in the text, and which immediately conjured in my head a bit the discourse Marianne Williamson created. Have you heard of Marianne Williamson?
No, I have not.
She was one of the presidential candidates in the last election. She stopped running at one point, but it was beautiful because she kind of brought something very valuable to political discussion and discourse on that front, because she was very rooting in a spiritual way and discussing the spiritual needs of a nation, of a society, of a community, of individuals.
That's amazing.
Yes, imagine running a presidential campaign and talking about these things. It was just wonderful. And there were memes about how like a spiritual witch was running for presidency and such. But I think it was seriously so brilliant.
I am all for a spiritual witch president.
Yeah, same. We need it.
Please
Immediately.
give us one.
Yeah.
We need one.
But I also see this distinction Lorde mentions when some folks aggressively differentiate astrology from science. Like, well, we know astrology is not science. I don't claim astrology is science. But the disregard and the belittling astrology is exposed to feels to me like it comes from a similar root.
Yeah.
And I almost dare to say like a white supremacist root of old-fashioned empirical science that doesn't acknowledge its own political constructs.
Yeah.
So it's like science is totally objective and what we see is what is and such. And it really irritates me when people have this attitude of like, yeah, you superstitious, strange creatures keep believing it's the Mercury retrograde or whatever, but it's actually science. Duh. You know, it's just like, calm down, Beyonce. Seriously.
Yeah, as if like rationality was the better option for you to live your life. Like, please, no. It's fine.
I mean, I don't see astrology as a system of belief. I just see it as a discipline with its own framing, which we could use as a tool in making sense of the world and the universe and our place in it in an interconnected way, you know, with symbols and ancient stories and ancient information.
Yeah.
And a curiosity towards coinciding events and such. That's where I see beauty in astrology. And it really bothers me so much when people treat you like they're better than you just because you said like, oh, I'm having my Saturn return and I really feel it.
So
you know what
annoying.
I mean?
It's so annoying when people react like that. And it's like, okay, I'm not asking you to believe in what I believe in, but look, this is helping me. I like those stories.
Yes.
This is giving me joy. Give me a fucking break. You can go back to believing in science.
Exactly.
Which, by the way, has not always been exact. So,
Yes.
Just saying.
And has been very racist and sexist.
oh yeah.
Led by
Oh,
white male scientists. I mean, come on. What are we talking about?
Let's give it a rest. Okay.
Yes. Maybe we can move on with the next section titled The Legacy of Users of the Erotic.
Absolutely.
It's a conversation with Cara Page, who is a black queer feminist cultural memory worker, curator and organizer who also was the executive director of the Audre Lorde project for 5 years. And this conversation centers the transformation of desire into transformative action. And there are very interesting questions posed by Page.
Absolutely.
I loved this discussion they had.
I loved it too. And I really like how also it was transcripted. It didn't feel like a, serious interview kind of thing written down with like censorship or anything like that. It really, when you read it, at least when I read it, I hear their voices and I hear the natural rhythm of a conversation on the phone. You know what I mean? Like it's not a
Loved
a
it.
blah, 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 blah kind of interview.
Absolutely. I loved it.
It's fun.
Especially the part where she expresses being a survivor and bystander and the effects this has or had on her relationship with the erotic and pleasurable. I think this was a very important point.
That was so
because
powerful.
this is an experience many survivors go through, right? The challenge Page described here is in associating with pleasure and desire without fear.
Exactly.
Losing control or being harmed. It's an experience many others can relate, I think. It's difficult.
And I think it's a really important and vulnerable experience for her to share, but indeed in relation to pleasure, I'm sure a lot of people who are survivors ask themselves that question, or maybe are even afraid to ask themselves that question of how do I regain, reclaim, relearn pleasure in my life after suffering or witnessing suffering around me. At some point, I think it's in on page 40, if you guys want to follow, there's this quote that really resonated with me at the end of, after she talks about her experience of being a survivor and how to reclaim her own power and pleasure. She says, quote, and then my work expanded in my 20s, and it wasn't just about family violence. This is about structural violence too, and about how I relate to myself through desire. When I am deeply undesirable, I am expendable, and I am only here for labor and reproduction. And then, what is my erotic self in that, when you're devoid of being able to define yourself outside of capitalism and white supremacy, end quote.
Ooh, girl, seriously.
Isn't that fucking powerful?
Wow.
Oof. That was kind of like confronting, you know what I mean, when I read that.
Goosebumps, seriously.
Yeah. That's such an important thing to say. Again,
Yeah.
I feel like this is something that I say every other sentence. This is so important, but guys,
It's
I swear
filled
this
with
is
it.
because I believe it's important.
It's filled with it, and I love it. I love the way she interconnects her pain and her experience of being a survivor with the broader systemic violence and the tools of this violence.
Exactly.
And how she kind of frames domestic violence as an extension of these structures, right?
Absolutely.
It's beautiful. And, you know, healing is a massive project.
It is.
And it's... our journeys of healing is also invaluable to me, both for myself and my loved ones as well. Like, when I observe a loved one taking wonderful steps towards healing and wholeness, I just feel a profound sense of joy. And like these kind of realizations about what our pain actually connects to, I just celebrate that so much, and it really teaches me a lot.
Yeah.
Really. And you know, I sensed this joy when you and I returned to therapy at the same time as well. Like, I felt such joy about that. So much joy.
Me too.
So proud of us.
Oh, so proud. Yeah, it's kind of incredible how many years it's taken us to go back to focusing on our healing path, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And once we finally did it, it's so pleasurable. It feels so good to take care of us, right?
So beautiful. And every time we exchange experiences, or like after a therapy session when we're like, oh my God, I need to process this, like it was amazing and such, it just makes me so happy, truly happy.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. It's such an honor to witness your journey towards healing better.
Thank you.
It's beautiful, and beautiful to share it with you.
Yeah, I'm so happy for you as well. I mean, it's such a huge step that you took in healing yourself, in addressing traumas and unresolved issues that you've had for a long time, and realizing that you deserve to be taken care of, to be supported, to support yourself in a different way. And I just find it beautiful. I find it absolutely magnificent that you're doing this for yourself. So
thank you so much.
I'm very proud of you.
So sweet. It's so sweet. Yeah, also in that sense, another point that I found very interesting in this section was the importance of our voice. In that section, it is meant as the literal voice because it is in the context of a physical liberation practice involving sound vibrations.
Oh, yes.
But even for the ones who cannot speak, we can broaden this as the importance of our expression and our insistence on our right to express, right? Like, reading this part the first time triggered in me the emotions of a very difficult time in my life. When in 3rd or 4th grade, during the peak of homophobic bullying I experienced, I remembered that I stopped speaking in public for a good year or so, you know?
Oh, wow.
Like with the fear that if I open my mouth, I would give bullies another reason to call me a faggot or something.
Oh, honey.
And this fear silenced me back then as a very vulnerable child, of course. And I just stopped speaking, you know. I was very traumatized, and I was thankful for each moment I could go by without being harassed. Like that was the situation, seriously. And how I got out of it, luckily, it was very lucky, that it was little by little, with small attempts of speaking out and slowly realizing that I actually make sense, and even more sense than those others who constantly speak. A small self-confidence kind of was ignited within me, and it grew bigger and bigger to the point that I was able to confront the bullies head on at one point.
Yes.
And like that transformation took a long time. I can't really pinpoint anything that took place outside of myself. I feel like it all happened inside. That's how I remember it. And I'm really thankful for that. Whatever triggered that healing within me, it almost feels like my body itself generated this energy of healing. And then, you know, my voice became one of my biggest powers towards my own healing and liberation. It's so wonderful.
That's
Like
so
the way
impressive.
we claim our power to express. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I really found it relevant, and sharing it doesn't give me pain. It actually reminds me of the strength that we carry inside a lot of times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's such an powerful evolution that you can see in your experience there, I feel, because indeed nowadays I know you very well, unfortunately, and I can honestly say I can honestly say that your voice is so powerful and you use it so well.
Thank you so much.
And you're one of the fiercest people I know when it comes to raising your voice, whether it be for yourself or for others. So I think that this experience really benefited you in the long run.
Yeah, perhaps it did. Thank you so much for your kind words. But it definitely, I think there's a connection in how this growth came from that suffering, and then maybe even became a tool against it.
Yeah.
That I could readily...
fuel.
Yeah, absolutely. But talking about suffering, Adrienne Maree Brown also points to how so much of what we build communities around is suffering. And that was a very interesting point to me.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense. Of course, it brings us together, and the urgencies activate us to take action, and to be there for each other and such. But she also suggests that the use of centering around pleasure, joy, and a direct connection to our bodies can be very useful. Can be super, super useful.
Oh yeah, incredibly useful. But it's interesting because, to go back to that point that she made about how we build community around suffering, I realized when I read that it's everywhere. It's literally everywhere. Even in our field, for example, the artistic world, we tend to put on a pedestal artists or filmmakers or writers who suffered a lot in their lives. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we just idolize them in such a way, and we're like, oh my God, they suffered so much, and then they made this beautiful art, and then people tend to believe, I mean, that's what I believed, for example, when I was a teenager, that I couldn't make good art if I wasn't suffering, and that if I wasn't suffering, I wasn't interesting.
I understand. Yeah, I mean, there's a widespread perception that suffering is virtue, right?
Exactly.
And
it's so fucked up.
It's really harmful, because I mean, then it really distracts our attention from what causes the suffering. We don't go like, but why? Why did this person suffer so much, and why did they have to suffer so much? Suffering isn't a pleasurable experience.
Oh no.
Why did this person have to go through this? Okay, nice that they found an output for the suffering, an expression that now we can ponder upon and feel some things when we witness that artwork, film, or whatever it is. But also, why? We want to dismantle the situations, the structures, the systems that puts us through that suffering, right? Maybe the virtue, I feel, is in fight against the perception that suffering is necessary.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think we also need to acknowledge the fact that outside of suffering, there's also beautiful ways to connect. Beautiful ways to connect. We can connect with our shared pain, of course, that can be beautiful, and it is beautiful in certain situations when needed. But it's also so beautiful to connect in joy, to connect in laughter, to connect in, for example, our shared passion for, let's say, cooking, or our passion for skincare, or reading this book, for example.
Beautiful.
That is also so valuable and so worthy of being implemented in everybody's life. You don't have to connect through pain and suffering only. You can do so much more.
Definitely. I think a connection around pleasure and joy is very crucial. Also, what Adrienne Maree Brown lays out in Emergent Strategy, which is another book that I hope you and I can embark on together as well. It's also filled with priceless wisdom and information. In that, one of the critical points is that what you pay attention to grows, and we become what we practice. And that's why it feels like it is so important to make pleasure and joy a part of our collective movements. And Brown also later defines desire and pleasure as two ways we can assert that there is something worth living for, right? I think this
Absolutely.
feels to me like a very key statement, because throughout the years that I followed Brown, I occasionally heard her describe this nihilistic attitude towards the destruction of the planet and the support people show to politicians who openly promote genocide for certain groups as a symptom of not wanting to live, not wanting life, not wanting to move towards life. And she asked, how do we make these people want to live? I want us to want to live. How do we make these children want to live? To show them that there's something worth living for, building new systems for, creating and facilitating movements for. This feeling, this joy and pleasure has to be there so that we feel like, so all of us feels like
Absolutely.
there is something worth living for.
Exactly.
There's pleasure,
Wow.
there's connection.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
Yeah, it's a life-changing point.
I think it's such an important, guideline, value, and such a belief that we all need to have from the very beginning.
Absolutely, because I think our suffering as a collective, as humanity maybe, is one of the things that makes us so self-destructive in a political level, in a social level, right? By self, I mean both individual and as species.
Yeah.
How do we replace that? How do we replace that with pleasure, with joy? How do we make it a priority?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's so interesting.
Yeah, it's completely blowing my mind as we're talking about it, even though I've read the book. Every time we just mention something that I've already read, it still keeps on blowing my fucking mind.
Exactly.
Something else during their conversation that really caught my attention is when Cara Page shared an anecdote almost, but from her childhood, but that was so pivotal in her own learning of self-love and pleasure and building her confidence and her trust in herself as a young child. That was when she talks about how her aunt, when she was little, would ask her to look at herself in the mirror and to say out loud, "I love myself." And then she would ask her to say, "I love Black people." And Cara said, quote, "At first I resisted, but then I was like, okay, let's do this." And she was committed to that practice every time I saw her until it rolled off the tongue and there was no pause. And she could say, okay, go to the mirror and love yourself. And I would knowingly, lovingly, end quote.
I loved that so much.
It's so beautiful.
I love that so much. So beautiful.
I love that her aunt implemented this practice in her at such a young age. That is so
Absolutely.
badass and so wonderful and loving and caring.
Her aunt affirming her love of Black people also.
Exactly, yeah.
It's so powerful.
Exactly. The love for her community, the love for her roots, the love for herself as a Black woman.
Absolutely. No matter what the society tells them.
Yes.
What they are and who they are, and the limitations of what they can be, who they can be.
Exactly.
Unconditionally creating this love within her nibbling, I think is so beautiful.
I find it so
beautiful.
I find it so incredible that she did that. And I mean, as Cara says in the book herself in this interview, it really, really helped her. It really, how do you say, it was almost, I would compare it to, putting a stone on a foundation. That's what I feel happened for her with that exercise. And it's so important that her aunts did that for her.
I agree completely.
I think that's such a great idea as a educative, raising a child habit. I think all parents should do that. Honestly.
These affirmative mantras that parents sometimes give their children, I think it's wonderful. Like, I am beautiful, and I am smart, and I am worthy.
I am strong.
I am strong. I'm honest. I'm kind. I mean, I can reflect that in my life. I could really use such affirmation growing up. I could really use...
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Positive
I could use someone making me say that I love myself many times over, looking at the mirror and pointing out like why I am so beautiful. Oh, imagine, Lucy, it would be life-changing for me.
I mean, you should really do it.
Yeah, still.
I can be your I can be your coach in
Yes.
that. Every day I'll text you and I'll be like, "Did you tell yourself that you love yourself?"
Thank you. That's really nice.
I think it would be very beneficial for you in the long run. I started doing it recently, and it's so difficult at first. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah.
It's really such a confronting experience because
Mhm.
then for me, I realized, oh wow, I really never said to myself that I love myself. Truly.
Yeah, that's true.
While looking at myself in the mirror and eye to eye kind of thing.
Yeah,
So I really recommend this practice to you
beautiful.
and to everyone listening, actually.
We can be so hard on ourselves sometimes. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, we can be fucking hard.
Yeah. The last point I want to make in this episode is related to how Brown searches for the orgasmic yes in making her decisions and to feel that resistance in her gut that already knows when something isn't for her. I love that so much. And this is something I kept as a principle since the last year of school and such, and now at the beginnings of my professional life as well. For me, it feels right to me or it doesn't feel right is enough reason, period.
Yeah.
That's enough reason. I don't owe or need any further explanation. Something needs to feel right for me to be involved in.
Yes. Abso-fucking-lutely.
Yeah.
If it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Exactly. I really try to firmly stand in this position where I simply won't accept to dwell in a situation that feels wrong or feels bad.
That's so good.
Because like it is stated at the footnote on page 14, there is another path that isn't full of stress, self-doubt, pain, victimization, and suffering. There is a path in which everything is learning, playing, practicing, and doing things anew.
Hell yes.
I love that. I use my feeling as a very important guide in that sense, and it accompanies to the communication I also put out, and there I receive a very reliable map to follow somehow.
Absolutely.
And that's really, really precious to me.
Completely agree with you, and I think it can be such a difficult practice at first. It's not easy when you haven't been taught that you can do that and that you have all the rights to never engage in anything that's not an orgasmic yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I do think that it is worth practicing, even by starting with the smallest thing. Let's say if your friend invites you to dinner or to whatever, go shopping, and you don't really feel like it, just say, no, we can reschedule. I don't feel like it today. And no need to say sorry.
Yeah,
by
absolutely.
The way. That's also an important thing. It's about just respecting yourself, respecting your feelings, respecting your sources of pleasure. If today your source of pleasure is staying home cozy and not seeing anybody, that's fine. If your source of pleasure is dancing with your friend and twerking on the floor until 4 a.m, that is good too. It's equally good. But I think it is indeed all about learning to at the same time put boundaries, but also truly listen to what you desire and what brings you joy and pleasure and satisfaction and all the happy feelings.
100%. Also, the loss of what's not for me is not going to make me sad. And as Adrienne Marie Brown also says, your no makes way for your yes.
Exactly.
So by practicing this no that sets boundaries that feel good for me, I am inviting what is for me. I'm inviting what feels good for me, what's pleasurable for me, and it's going to come. So there's no hurry. I don't also have to rush towards it or be under the illusion of scarcity and such.
Oh, yeah.
It'll come to you.
The more you will practice that, I
will
believe that's how you will attract what's the best for you as well. And what will always bring you an orgasmic yes. And what is not for you will not come onto your path in such a, sometimes aggressive way.
Yeah. Well, I have 2 questions for you actually, and related to our relationship to excess and enough, mentioned in the book also. Can you imagine being healed enough?
That is such a good question.
Yeah, a direct quote in the book, by the way.
Yes, and a beautiful quote and such a good question to ask. I believe. Can I imagine being healed enough? Well, that it's funny because as we've mentioned, I've started therapy recently, and I'm so excited about it and excited to be on this new path of healing. Not that I haven't been on the path of healing before, but I was on my own in the past when I tried to heal myself, and now I am accompanied and supported by an outside presence and outside support system. But the idea of therapy eventually ending, for example, which would mean that I am healed enough at that point, is still scaring me.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm like, oh,
What is
wow.
scary in it?
Having to stop, because I suppose that at the point where I'm at right now, I don't really imagine myself being healed enough yet. And so I have trouble putting my shoes in the shoes of future me which will be healed enough.
Yeah.
In that sense. But, however, I believe that at some point I will be satisfied with my healing process, and that's going to be a beautiful and difficult day, I think, at the same time. But that's,
beautiful.
That's how I see
Beautiful.
it.
It is difficult to imagine that future you, right?
Yeah. Can you imagine being healed enough?
Yeah, just like you said, it almost feels like if we could imagine it, maybe it would be more in our reach, at least, or something. But I also do have hope of being healed enough at one point. I do have that hope.
Yeah.
And I feel that it is something that my body and my psyche will somehow communicate to me. I think it won't be a rational decision. I don't know if I will be able to rationally perceive it, or maybe I will be able to see the signs showing that healing. But I think I just hope that I will be able to recognize it when I'm finally healed enough. And I'm really curious to that feeling.
Yeah.
How it will feel then to just be different than how it is now. Already, the more we broaden our perception of pleasure and feeling good, me a couple of years before couldn't even imagine being in the shoes of me now, I feel.
Exactly. But it's such a good question, such a beautiful question.
My second question to you is, what is the latest action you took towards improving the pleasure in your life?
Oh, well, actually, funny story, maybe TMI story, but whatever.
No such thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When I started reading this book, I read it every day. And so every day I started masturbating.
Perfect. I love it.
That was something that I hadn't done that in such a long time, literally masturbating every day. But this book inspired me to do that. Literally, I would get aroused as I would read it, even though there is no really, porn in it or erotic writing in it.
Yeah.
But it's just that it aroused me because it was just empowering and it was just mind-blowing, and it was encouraging me to love on myself and embrace all pleasurable parts of myself. And I think that's why I started jerking off every day.
I love that, Lucy. Maybe it is a sign of already healing at this point, because it makes you maybe also able to distinctively feel an erotic awakening instead of a pornographic trigger to feel horny, but a connection with yourself and how your body can give you pleasure, right?
Because suddenly I just found joy and pleasure in just doing something for myself and having pleasure just for me, And that was such a new thing in a way. So I
love this so much.
I did that for 10 days straight.
That's brilliant, Lucy. I love it for you.
And then I had to tone it down. I was like, okay, that's a bit too much. You gotta calm down.
Moderation.
Yes, moderation, exactly. Recognizing when I'm going into excess.
I love that.
But what about you?
I mean, I have been searching for the perfect pillow. Seriously. And I am yet to find it, but I'm getting closer to it. like the perfect pillow. I've been buying so many pillows and trying, is it the one? And then I have this like love at first sight. I'm like, yes, this is the one. Oh my God, I can just fall asleep right now. And then the night comes and I'm like, not exactly. And then I keep searching. But I think finding the perfect pillow will be like finding a soulmate for me. And
Oh my God.
I will love sleeping on it. Already it improved a lot.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Already. Oh, yeah.
And it's a specific pillow. Like, are you picky about the pillow to sleep on? Like, are you looking for a certain softness or something?
I mean, at first I thought I needed something with more structure, a bit harder. But then the one I got was a bit too hard because my neck was literally bent when I was laying on it because it was really hard. And then I was like, okay, this neck isn't going to work. And then I got one that is a bit softer. That feels fine, but still it's a bit too present. So I think I will go even softer and a different texture in the filling.
I mean, I think it's important that you find the right pillow. It is indeed, as you said, like finding a soulmate, like literally.
Oh, sleep is seriously a good sleep is such a pleasure.
Oh, and finding the right pillow for it is such a great hunt.
Yes,
Seriously,
exactly.
I think it's gonna change your life once you find the one.
Absolutely. And also, masturbation accompanying this book was a part of me reading this first time as well in 2019, because also Adrienne Maree Brown explicitly recommends that too to the ones who can and want to. Just like masturbate before each section, she says, right? That's beautiful.
We were one of those.
Yes. And I have one final question for our listeners to kind of meditate on a little bit.
Ooh.
What if every single individual could demand a shiftable economic system in which everyone will be able to do what they love for a living? And what if we stopped pushing narratives of necessity, scarcity, and practicality and replacing them with expression of desire and feeling? What if we normalize demanding feeling good and making that demand a good enough reason for change?
Wow. That's a really good question.
I feel like this can be such a base.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm really curious as to what will be the answers, actually.
Yeah. Imagine being able to demand that. I think that's wonderful. Being able to say like, no, sorry, I am not going to try to earn money this way because it just doesn't feel good, you know?
Yeah.
So the system has to provide me with something that will feel good and enriching and pleasurable. At the same time, will give me whatever currency that we use now in this changed society. You know what I mean? Whatever, the means that allow me to survive comfortably, which is also a demand, a very righteous demand, right? To exist comfortably.
Oh, I believe so, yeah.
So, I mean, this is so radical at the core. And yeah, I think these are beautiful questions to meditate on a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm curious what everybody will think about that, and I hope it raises other questions for whoever is listening.
And Lucy, it was an incredible pleasure for me to have this conversation with you in this episode.
Same here.
If you're ready for it, we can wrap it up.
Yes, I am.
Also, thank you for listening to the first episode of Soft Edges. To all our listeners, I am looking forward to meet you back again on our second episode.
Yes, absolutely. We hope that you thoroughly enjoyed listening to the first 50 pages of Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Maree Brown. And we hope to see you again.
Yes.
Very soon.
And 2 recommendations by Adrienne Maree Brown. One is the masturbation before each episode. I was thinking if you can and if you want to, you can also masturbate before listening to each episode from this podcast as well. I mean, this is what Brown recommends and I find it very valuable. And the second recommendation I got from Brown is that put psychedelic mushrooms in a fruity smoothie or dark chocolate.
Oh, yeah.
I know I will.
That's literally what I'm going to do tomorrow, by the way. I'm taking truffles and I'm going to eat them with dark chocolate. I bought dark chocolate specifically for that reason today because she recommended it.
Yes, Lucy. Yes. I love that.
So, I'll let you all know next week how it went.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you, everyone. This was the first episode of Soft Edges, and see you in the next one.
Thank you. See you.
Bye. Bye. Our music is by the amazing Patrick Walinga, and our graphic design is by the incredible Yuri Sato.